Without further ado, the one, the only, Randle Chowning. Take it away.
Thank you all. Thank you, Robin. Did Chris Albert run off? Is he getting drunk or something? Oh, man, I wanted you all to give him a hand for his tireless efforts in Music Monday. And I got some stories about Chris I wanted to tell, but anyway, well, I'll talk to him later. I'm going to try to run through my little story and as quickly as possible because I want to talk to some of you, and I hope you have some questions. And so I'm going to rip into it and see how quickly. I think I can do this. My story can be condensed to 30 minutes, so that would give us maybe 20, 30 minutes to BS some, tell stories, ask questions. None from John Sellers. No, you don't get any questions, all right? And Cochran, I'll get to you later, all right? All right, I was born in Mountain View, Missouri, 1950, and down in Howell County, and it's a little bit east of West Plains, and it's a border county, and pretty much in, I would say, the heart, or near the heart of the Ozarks. And so I had all those influences that were deep hillbilly, if you will, and I was fortunate that my father, who was in North Africa with General Patton, was a radio man, and he knew how to repair radios. And so he was kind of a technician and ended up being an electrical engineer and kind of a jack of all trades and inventing stuff and all this. But he had a radio TV shop when I grew up in the early 50s. But the problem was he was down Mountain View, Missouri, which at the time couldn't get TV too good. But he had all the latest stuff you could have, and he realized we lived in a little house outside on the edge of town on a hill, and he realized that we could get a good signal because we were uphill from Memphis. And so I wasn't aware of how important that was for me when I was like 5, 6 years old and beyond. And we got it pretty good because he had the best stuff you get. He had a huge antenna. And so I'm watching Memphis TV way off down in the boonies. And that was really cool. And the other thing was radio. We got Memphis radio really good. And I had a brother that was 7 years older than me. And so I was about 7, he's 14. He's sneaking cigarettes, and he's in the bedroom in there, and he's dialing in Memphis radio. And that's the first time I heard black music. And it scared me to death at first. And then I learned to love it. And my dad would come in and bust us every once in a while. He'd bust my brother for smoking. But it was really cool. And then in the daytime, of course, I had all this folk music and country music and stuff back then that there wasn't much rock and roll for a little while. But my mother sang. She sang really good. She sang like a bird, I think. And so I was a shy kid, but it seemed natural to sing. So I think I was about 5 maybe. I asked her to teach me a song, and she taught me Red River Valley. And I was so proud of myself. I memorized the lyrics, had the melody. Man, I had it. And so I'd sing it. Anybody come over to the house, I'd say, well, you want to hear me sing Red River Valley, don't you? And so on my dad's side of the family, he had a sister that was lesbian that lived in Kansas City. And she was a pretty serious old gal, but harmless. Anyway, we called her Aunt Boots. That was her nickname, Aunt Boots. Ruby Chowning was her name. And she lived with a woman a long time up in Kansas City. So at any rate, she'd come to town periodically. And so here I am, 5 years old, going, hey, come on. And so I said, hey, you got to hear me sing Red River Valley. So I'm singing it, and I'm just so proud. And she kind of gets down almost in my face. And she turns her head one way, turns her head the other, and she goes, "Well, I don't know if you really got it or you're just another Elvis." True story. And I'm going to talk about her a little bit later because it's kind of interesting. But at any rate, first time on stage, they had a Christmas show, and they had a group of us boys in first grade, and we sang this little song. And I remember that I felt really good when I walked down on stage. First time I walked down on stage, and it felt really warm. But that could be because the gymnasium was packed, and it was a school Christmas show, all ages, all groups. But at any rate, I just remember that very well, that I felt good on stage. I felt comfortable. But I used to have to rehearse my lines to go in and buy a Coke. I was so shy, when I was going there. "Can I have a cherry Coke, please?" But that's the kind of kid I was. Anyway, my family moved up here in 1959, and the Ozark Jubilee was in its latter stages, and we went a couple of times, and it was so great. And I was so impressed with Slim Wilson. He was the band leader at that time, and I'm looking, this guy had on a pair of headphones, and he's kind of, leading everybody and giving everybody cues and stuff. And I just went, "Oh my God, how cool is that?" And so, and then we always watched, my family always had Porter Wagner on, of course, every week. And that was before Dolly was with him. It was Norma Jean, if anybody remembers her, a gal from Oklahoma. And I got this imprinted image in my mind of a guy standing there with a guitar and singing. That was just like, okay, that's what you do, right? If you can swing it, right? And so a number of years went by, and I was about 12 years old. I wanted my dad to help me out learning guitar, but he really wasn't familiar with a 6-string guitar, but he was somewhat familiar with steel, pedal steel and dobro. Well, that didn't work out so well. So he started showing me, bless his heart, he started showing me all these fundamentals of steel guitar. Well, that doesn't do any good if you're trying to sing and back yourself up, So that didn't work out. So a number of years went by, and eventually I got a guitar from Sears Roebuck, and it was about $25, I think. And I eventually learned to play on that a little bit, and that took me up, probably in high school, going into high school, and kind of early on, I just had an imagination, and I kind of would hear melodies and little lyrics. The other thing about my dad having the TV shop too back in the 50s was he had a dealership on Philco and stereos, and they were a member of the record club. So my mother had hi-fi, wonderful hi-fi, and she had all these various records from Hank Williams to Frank Sinatra. I mean, everything you can imagine. And when I was real little, I used to, believe it or not, I used to listen to Glenn Miller a whole lot. And I loved that. And then there were other records. I don't know. I mean, my parents, if they would have been parents now, I think they would have choked me and sent me away to military school because I just did stuff over and over again. And my mother had a record by the Ink Spots, black group, and they had a song that I played to death. It was called Address Unknown. I loved that. I loved the Ink Spots. I used to listen to them over and over again. I guess my mother was singing her own songs, not let me drive her crazy. But anyway, so that was, I was surrounded because my dad had the TV radio shop, and my mother was in the record club, and then she sang, and my favorite that she sang, and like I say, she was really, I thought, she could carry a tune really good. She had good pitch. She sang Over the Rainbow a lot. And when she would go into that bridge where it goes, someday I'll wish upon a star and wake up where the clouds are, that would just take me there. You know, I'd go, God, that's great. And so that song probably influenced me more as a very young boy than anything I've ever heard since, really. I mean, that to me is it. So, and those guys did that on commission for the movie. I could never do that. They did that for hire to write that song. So that amazes me. Okay, anyway, junior high, early high school, fairly routine. I entered Glendale High School here in town, 1964, and that was, of course, the British invasion. And nobody could escape it if they wanted to. And instead of getting swept up in that, I started backtracking and doing a study of blues and old rock and roll, because that's what they were influenced by. So I wanted to see what turned them on. And I really got stuck in the blues for a long time as a guy in later years of high school. And that's kind of where my guitar started coming together, as far as if I'm anything, I can get away with playing blues. I'm not really a country guitar player, or anything else. So I consider myself, or I hope was or is, a writer first, musician second. And that's why you don't see me out jamming and all this stuff. I mean, I quit doing that when I was about 18, you know. Oh, let's make some noise. Here, turn that up, you know. And, at any rate, so high school, the fall of 1968. Oh, I want to say I did listen a lot to Muddy Waters, and I love Muddy, and he shares the same birth date that I do, which is April 4th, which is interesting. And at any rate, I entered Southwest Missouri in 1968, fall. And that's when I met a guitar player named Donnie Thompson. And through a mutual friend of ours, and he was raving about Donnie's playing. And Donnie, I was amazed at him too then, because anything that was coming out on record, Donnie could just repeat it, just like that. He listened to it and boom, fiddle around for a little while and played it perfect. And I'm going, oh, I've never been able to do that. Anyhow, Donnie had a friend named Mitchell Smith, and Mitchell was kind of an audiophile, kind of a tech geek kind of guy, and he had a stereo tape machine that would record sound with sound. And so what that means is, what we would do, we'd get together for a lot of weekends, and Donnie also had a friend that played bass, and we would record, we'd set up in the room and try to get a blend of instruments and record all the instruments over here on one side. Then the machine had the ability to play that back, and you could dub on or add other things over on the other side of the stereo. Then we'd blend that together in mono, and we thought we were doing great stuff. And it was huge fun, hit and miss sound-wise, but I got to listen to myself back a lot, and I kind of liked listening to myself then. Now, I don't like listening to myself. I'd rather eat stale crackers than listen to myself right now. But it was fun. Donnie and I, when I was in the early days of college, first couple of years, we had a little band we called Catfish Blues. And of course, obviously, we played some blues, but we played a lot of, I remember we did a lot of Creedence Clearwater. and that was real popular. Well, still is, but it really popular then. And that would have been 1969, and we played a lot for the Sig Pies over at. We were their darlings, but I think big parties, little parties, they had us a lot, and they seemed to really enjoy it. But we played for $100, and that's between 4 guys. So I think that had something to do with it. So anyway, we did a lot of Sig Pie parties, and so moving on down. Let's go, boy. Yeah. We get rid of that page. Oh man, I'm getting ahead of this. So this is good. What time is it? All right. Well, no. Think so. For some reason, I kind of fell into more and more lead guitar. I think it was, I just did, and every night I would sit around and I'd have a book here on one table when I was in college, and then I'd have my guitar, and I'd be reading and playing, and I just fell into the sort of lead stuff. And Donnie and I, he went off doing other things, and we kind of fell out. And about this time, that aunt that I was telling you about from Kansas City, she shows up one afternoon at my parents' house. I'm still living with them. And she walks in her kind of overbearing, intense fashion. And she was a good gal, really. And she sat down and she looks at me real seriously. And she says, well, I hear you're really trying to get into this music stuff. And I said, yeah, I'm pretty much obsessed with it, actually. And she says, you got to feel it. And I'll tell you, that's come back. And then she went off. That was it. She went off doing somewhere else. And that's all I remember about her coming in. My parents weren't there. And she sat down and talked to me. And that was the whole conversation. And she was so damn right on. I mean, you do. If you ain't feeling it, you ain't going to make it, you know. And somehow, today's music seems that they make it without feeling it. But I don't want to, I used to say that about Taylor Not So Swift, and then she sold a bazillion albums, and I said, God, she's a genius. Well, it's all about communicating, really, no matter how you do it. Bob Dylan, Bob, I've listened to a lot of Bob, and some of his records, he can actually sing. But, he actually can. You'd be surprised. But he didn't take the time. He didn't have to. And he realized early on, I'll just be outrageous. That way everybody will know who I am. He didn't have to sing. He writes like crazy. And so anyway, he communicates. So that's the deal. And he still gets people recording his songs. It's uncanny. I've never seen anything like it, really. So anyway, enough about him. Okay, college. Well, it came about that I got into a band with Chris Albert, who doesn't want to be here. Well, I don't blame him after what happened, but at any rate, we had John Mitchell on drums, and we had a female piano player and singer from St. Louis named Sherry Peters, and Stevie Richardson. If any of you guys know Stevie, he's been gone from town for a number of years, but he's a Springfield native and a good bass player, good musician overall, and we called ourselves Shorty Dunn. And we played in Joplin, I think the summer of '71, at a little place called Top Hat. And it was great. Joplin people, they would come out every night of the week and get crazy and have a good time, and we never had a problem. And so every night after we finished at 1 o'clock, we'd end up over at the Denny's out on Range Line and I-44. And so we would go out there, and there he is. I'm talking about Top Hat when we were out on Range Line at the motel, and we go to Denny's every night after the gig. So subsequently, we'd end up going back to the motel, all 5 of us, with Sherry in the van, and we'd go back there probably, it'd be 3 o'clock or 3:30. So some Barney Fife guy up at the front desk, after a while, got to noticing that we had this gal in this van going back to this motel room every night about 3 o'clock in the morning. So they called the Vice Squad. And I'm thinking, this guy thinks that this same gal is going to the same motel room with the same 4 guys to be a prostitute every night. No, serious. And so, remember that, Chris? And so Chris he said, Sherry, show him your musician's card and your ID. And we were members of the local union back then. And at any rate, it was a great, fun summer. And the thing is, that kind of exposed me a little bit to more people locally. And a couple of things happened that kind of triggered events. And one was Lloyd Hicks had been out, I think, on the West Coast, the drummer. And he came back to town, and he asked Bungie if he would let him come back into Granny's Bathwater. And Bungie agreed to that, and that put Larry Lee was playing drums with him, and so Larry was freed up at that time. And the other thing was that Larry was also involved with Kurt Hargis. I know he's somewhere in here. Well, I saw Larry back there. Anyway, Larry was involved with Kurt and Steve Canaday, putting together the Bijou Theater Club. And so came about that Larry was tending bar down there some in the afternoons, and there wasn't anybody coming in down there in the afternoons. It was like not a dive, if you will. And so I went down there after class one day and got him to come out to the car. I think I had a cassette player out there. And I played him some stuff and said, I'd really like to share some songs and sit around and see, because I knew he wrote songs. And of course, he had such a voice. And I told him, I said, I've been trying to get John Dillon interested in sitting around. And I said, he's been like trying to get a date with the captain of the cheerleader squad. He's being really hard to get. And so some time went by, and I think because Larry was agreeable to the idea, John did come in, and of course we could get free beer and snacks, and we sat back in the office room of the club because the winter was approaching, and the big room was cold. And so we sat in this little 12 by 12 room, and first time we got together, we had acoustic guitars, and John dove into a song of his called Fly Away Home. And Larry and I kind of jumped in there, and before the song was over, we were doing harmonies with him. And I just went, holy crap, because our harmony blend, the only way I can describe it's not real strong, but it was seductive, and it made people want to kind of get closer. I always felt that. And compared to the Eagles, we were wimps, but they'd come at you, they'd pin your ears back, and really good. And ours was good too. It was just softer and, like I say, more seductive and not so harsh. And so little time went by. Oh, I should say that that first night that we got together, we went out to Casper's when he was on Glenstone. Remember when he was out there? And it was getting towards Christmas time, and he had all those cookies and things hanging. And so it turns out John had a tab out with Casper that was a year old. That's why he wanted to go out there. Casper was keeping him alive. So at any rate, so a little time went by, and we got together a couple of times like that, 3. And I said, I know this character over on campus that you can't miss, nicknamed Superman. And I said, I think he's a pretty good bass player. And I said, you mind if he just comes over and just sits in, you know? And he had a little bitty amp that he would bring in. So I used to take Soup over there at the clubs in the afternoon, or the club in the afternoon, and he would real quietly and softly play bass behind us. And that was really fun. And then Dylan says, well, I think we should bring in my friend Steve Cash. And I was familiar with Steve, and I'd heard Steve sit in with John, and Steve had a song called Black Sky. And it just had a very unique kind of dark, alluring quality to it, hard to describe as well. And so Steve started coming over, and more time went by. Christmas came, everybody kind of dispersed, and we got back together after Christmas. And eventually, because the club had a sound system, Larry brought in his drum kit, and we next thing you know, we were up on the club stage in the afternoons rehearsing electrically. And so we managed after a time. It's still, I should also say that before all this, when I left Chris's band, now this, in any other world, this would have been suicide, because I left a band that was well liked, had plenty of gigs, for a bunch of guys sitting around with no gigs and no name and wasn't even a band. And I'm going, it's just an idea maybe that they didn't want to really deal with, maybe. You know, but we still kept getting together. And so oh, did he? We had about maybe 15, 20 songs roughly worked up, rehearsed. And so somebody canceled on a Thursday night. Well, the club really had problems drawing people anyway, but I forget who it was, but they asked us to play and improvise, and so we did. And there was a stereo tape machine in the club, and it was attached to the soundboard, had a feed from the soundboard. And there was probably 20 people that Thursday night at the club, maybe 30. And but the tape machine was rolling. And eventually, and this story's been told a lot, but really at that time only Kurt and very few people, some Grandy's Bathwater fans and Kurt and Steve Kennedy were really interested in what we were doing. And I want to backtrack a little bit, because Mike and I think Chris may have been played that day out at Springfield Lake, but I want to talk about Sound Farm, because Sound Farm was this incredible, talented, creative bunch of guys from based out of Columbia, Missouri, and they had 4 singers, and they were just doing such outrageous takes on their own material. I thought was just amazing. And plus they did a few covers, and that was very unique. And that lit a fire in me before the Bijou thing, about the time Chris and I were playing, I thought, man, I want to do something like that. I love that. I want to do. But the problem is when you have more than one songwriter or you have multiple singers in a group, it's really hard to sustain that because songwriters get delusions of grandeur. I'm guilty. They want to hear strings on their songs. They want to hear saxophones. They want to hear flutes and stuff. Well, that's okay, but you shouldn't be cut loose with that because you're going to damn well do it, and you just want to hear all that stuff. And for the Daredevils, if we would have stuck to maybe Swamp Rock, or if you want to get to Heaven or Black Sky, I mean, it would have been boring after a time, but we would have stuck to more of that consistent sound instead of being so varied. Probably would have helped out. But at any rate, the club burnt down. Burned all our equipment, most of it, except our guitars. That summer would have been summer of 72. And everybody scattered, more or less. We didn't have any gigs. We didn't have nothing. And I thought that was the end of it, and probably should have been, or would have been. John and Cash went out to Colorado. There was a independent label out there they tried to get hooked up with, and I think Larry went out to L.A. for a while, and my brother had come to town, which I want to say Mike Cochran, who was standout in the Sound Farm. Mike Cochran used to play football against my brother. West Plains against Mountain View, Missouri. The Zizzers. West Plains Zizzers. Yeah. I know. There's just coincidences. There we go. Border County. Well, you know, all Missouri border counties were Confederate leaning. True. At any rate, I digress. Well, I forget. I skipped over some stuff that I think is important. But at any rate, so the club burned, and we had no gigs, we had no band, we had nothing. So everybody kind of scattered, and my brother, who had come to town, was kind of interested in what was going on, and he ended up being our road manager later on. He and I rented this old farmhouse north of town, and that summer we painted a couple of houses over in Stockton, Missouri, just to get by. But you got to realize, and we probably made $200 to paint these houses, but back then gas was 35 cents still. And you could live for nothing, and almost. And so at any rate, that summer kind of everybody was scattered. Then I suggested to my brother, I said, there's a production company, there are promoters as well up in Kansas City that have a management company, and they have Brewer and Shipley, the folk duo. They manage them from One Toke Over the Line fame. And I said, I think we ought to take our band demo up there and throw it at them, you know, see if we can get any response. So he got on the phone. He tried to call up Jerry Garcia one time. He would do anything, just, okay, I'll just call him up, right? Well, he did, and they set up a meeting. So we met some of the staff. We took our band demo up there, and they were interested, and then we went away, and then they passed it around to some of the other staff. There was probably 8 or 10 people at that company at the time, and they all got interested, and they invited us toward the end of that summer when we had nothing to come up and play on a free concert up at the park in KC. Go Chiefs. And we did, and they were favorably impressed. And so by October of that 72, we signed a management deal with them. And they had a network that they booked their guys on, which were mainly solo acoustic guys. But they had a network of Midwestern colleges in Iowa, a lot of them in Kansas, Missouri, Southern Illinois. We played MU, we played Washington U in St. Louis, Southern SIU, and a bunch of other places. And not too many gigs, but enough to keep us together. And they say, guys, you'll each draw $50 a week, whether you play or not. I'm telling you, that's true. And so somehow everybody stayed together, and right before that time, I'm jumping ahead. Right before that time, when we had our, did I skip over the John Hammond Steve Kennedy deal? I guess I did. Damn. Anyway, Steve Kennedy managed to get charm the secretary, I guess, of John Hammond's Columbia Records in New York, and she buzzed John Hammond and said, I've got this guy out here from Missouri that thinks you really ought to listen to this band. I mean, any other time they would say, when's lunch? Tell him to, whatever, drop it on the desk. But he said yes, and I guess it was just the bizarre nature of the whole thing. He just thought, what? Okay. And John Hammond liked Black Sky. Once again, Black Sky, and Ruard and Shipley recorded Black Sky. So as simple as that was, it just had a different thing about it that caught people's attention. And so the Epic label are the ones that had the budget to buy our first studio time, and that was at the old Top Talent multi-track here, 8-track, I think, here in town. And Cy Simon owned it, and Wayne Carson did a lot of demos in there, but it was available to the public to rent, to go. And I think, Chris, we did a demo in there before that, prior to us going in there. But Epic bought us a couple of days' worth of time in the studio, and we thought, they were going to send a producer down to kind of supervise, and he had scheduling problems, and so they sent us in on our own. And so we just set up in there, and we played and recorded everything we knew in 2 days. It's probably 15, 20 songs, and some of them wasn't too bad, but we just blazed through this, and because we wanted to get it all captured. And so we sent that back to Epic, and they're going, here's 4 singers, all these different types of songs, and they're going. So eventually they did send this producer down, and he listened to us. We played for him in a private setting. We didn't have a gig, and he sat around, listened to us, and he was interested, but he didn't think we were ready to. He couldn't figure out how he could package us at that time. And I think we had John's then girlfriend Elizabeth sitting in, and maybe Bill Jones, and so we had a lot of people, and he just, he was interested though. And so he said, well, I don't think you're ready. So at any rate, from that demo tape, that's the one we took to Kansas City. Go Chiefs. And I've got a couple more. And played for Good Karma Productions, and so we did the park gig, and we signed with them, and they put us around the colleges, and we were passed that winter by Warner Brothers, which was kind of discouraging, but we still had people coming out to listen to us from record companies, so nobody was running away. We didn't really have anything else to go to, and so in May of '72, Stan had sent a tape out to A&M, and it just by a fluke, another kind of accident, Glenn Johns from England, and famous legendary producer, and David Anderley from A&M came to hear us in KC. Go Chiefs. And I'll quit. And after a time, we got together with them after the gig, and they heard some more material, and back at the office of the management company, and so they agreed to give us a deal. And so I think everybody was walking on air for a while, and because that was really everybody had that kind of singular purpose. Let's make a record if we can. We got people listening to us. Let's just see if we can make a record. And you know, the story's well documented. But what happened? I have to say now that I'm a crappy band member. I really am. I just, for some reason, I just get itchy after a while. Oh, well, thank you. And hopefully my voice will hold up. I've got a little bit of sinuses today, but I get itchy. And after our second album, I really admired Glenn Johns. He was an amazing person, and he deserves every bit of his fame and accolades, because he's just incredible. And I learned a lot from Glenn watching him. I still, when I do my little recordings at home, I use his schooling just from watching the way he did it. And after the second album, we had a dispute over what songs were going to go on and what wasn't. And Glenn bailed on us after the second album. And that really was a letdown for me. And I started to get itchy. And we did our third album down in Nashville. And after that, the other thing was, as a whole, the group didn't want to tour, make long tours. And that, with the record label, they start to look at that kind of stuff, because everybody goes out 60 days, 90 days consecutively, instead of out and in, and because it just creates a lot of, one thing was, if you're opening act and your headliner you're with, if you're out and in, they have to replace you, and they don't want to mess with that. They just want to have their opening act all the way through. So that kind of let me down, and there was a lot of circumstances, but I think that was probably my first bout of temporary insanity, which I've had several. I bailed after the third album, and I went out. I didn't tell anybody my whereabouts. I didn't tell my family, but actually I was about 40 miles out of town at Mark Twain Forest camping, and some time went by, and I was replaced, because I just didn't want to talk to anybody at all, nobody. And time went by, a few months, probably in that fall, that was the spring, I think of 75 maybe, 76, I don't know, and 76 maybe. Some time went by, and I went up to, back up to Good Karma Productions, and I talked to Stan Plesser, and I said, you think Jerry would take a meeting with us, Jerry Moss, at A&M? And so he set it up, and Stan and I went out to see Jerry, and we just sat down and talked to him, and Jerry offered me a record deal without hearing anything. And I'm like going, okay. I mean, I'm mentally unstable at the time, you got to understand. Truly. And I'm going, oh, shit. But, and the deal was, to show you how unstable I was, I thought, well, hell, I can't lose. Anything I do is going to be great. Doesn't matter. Whatever So instead of going out there and taking advantage of the musicians and just laying around the record label like a dog on a rug, and just being a fixture at the label, turns out Jerry liked the way I played guitar, president of the damn record company. And I vaguely knew that, and I thought, well, I just, at that point, because I wasn't thinking clearly, and my brother told me I wasn't thinking clearly, and he was right, I opted to put together another band here, regionally. And so ultimately it boiled down to myself, Lloyd Hicks, and Larry Van Fleet, who I guess a lot of you may know, great musician, and Ken Shepard from Columbia, and he was a member of the Sound Farm. Great singer, great songwriter, and the four of us ended up in Bridgeport, Connecticut, outside of New York City, and we got the album completed. Jason LeMasters from here in town played on a couple of things, and the record company was lukewarm about it, and the real problem appeared not long after that when the head of the label, Jerry, he wanted to put out a song that Ken Shepard sang on the record called So Close to the Feeling. Great song, great chorus. I mean, he wanted to put that out as a single. Well, here's the problem. That's where I went to the dumpster, and the real folly of this whole thing took shape. So Stan, my good old manager Stan, he tells Jerry, he goes, well, that's Ken Shepard, you know, he's not signed. He's in Randle's band. And in order to put this single out, you got to give him a record deal. And so at this point, I know Mr. Moss, who had an infinite patience, probably went, I'm getting screwed left and right, and north, south, east, and west here. And so everything, you know, naturally. So that was, but I was still supposed to do a second record with him. So a little time went by, and I got a call from D. Clinton Thompson, Donnie Thompson, and he said, this is about 1979, and he said, we're putting a thing together, me and Lou Whitney, with Lloyd, and would you like to give it a try? And I said, well, sure. And so we got together and rehearsed a couple of weeks, and one night in this little room that we rehearsed in, it was wintertime, and we had this little stove, and Donnie and I were standing over there trying to warm up. We'd taken a little break, and all we had, Lloyd always had a very simple drum kit, because he didn't need any more than that. He could make a hell of a lot of noise with a very simple drum kit. And we just had two guitar amps, small guitar amps. Our guitars plugged in, no effects pedals or any high-tech stuff, and Lou had a bass amp. And so we're taking a break, and Lou's looking around, and he goes, man, this is a skeletal deal. And Donnie looked at me, and I looked at him, and we went, we're the skeletons. And I've got a live tape that doesn't sound too damn bad. Out at, anybody remember the Safari Room out on Battlefield? It's a Safari Room. Well, that was our first gig, 6 nights a week. And man, Lloyd kicked our ass, man. It was about the time punk rock was coming out, and he did everything. He had everything right at that point where it was almost out of control, but it wasn't. It was just right to the edge. And so a little bit, I think tension in groups is actually a positive thing, because it keeps it edgy. And at that time, him and Donnie seemed to be going back and forth of who was keeping the best rhythm or something. I don't know. There was tension there, but it was amazing. And so I had a cassette player that had a sound suppressor on it where you couldn't drive the signal. And so it's pretty clean. The tape doesn't have too much. It's got a little bit of distortion, but it's a fun tape. And now it's on CD. But that was the Skeletons. And then And wouldn't you know it, I thought I had another record deal, so I dropped out. Well, of course, the record deal about 2 months later fell through. But they did send me some money for breaking the contract. And it was a fairly good chunk of money. And I became really despondent then. I thought, well, if you're going to pay me 10 or 20 grand not to do anything, I'm not going to do anything. And so I honestly, I didn't touch a guitar for a year, or I never played a song all the way through for a year. And it just kind of, and I at that time, I think I was smoking a joint right after breakfast. And it's weird when you're smoking pot in the mornings. I know some of you know, but it makes for a kind of the day becomes a whole different deal. It really does. At any rate, oh man, I'm telling you. Now honestly, who thought marijuana would be legal in Missouri? Well, Rob Lurvey did. That's because he's been involved with Normal for so long, right? But no, I didn't think I'd see it in my lifetime, really. But now I'm too damn old to really enjoy it. Last time I smoked about a year ago was with my grandson. True. He's 20 years old, and he lives in Nashville, and he was up here last winter because he broke his ankle. And we said, well, just come up and stay with us this winter. And so we were out back at a kettle fire, and we smoked this, and I don't smoke hardly anymore, and we smoked this stuff, and I said, his name's Luke, and I said, Luke, I don't know if I can get back in the house. And so I'm going, so now it's legal, and I really don't care. That's true. I'm not kidding. Thank God we don't have prohibition on alcohol anymore. But anyway, let me get up here, and I said I was going to go through this quickly, didn't I? Okay, where are we here? Well, I'm way ahead now. Thank God. Yeah. I was, oddly enough, I'll tell you another sidelight. Steve Canaday, I'll get to it later, but Janie and I moved down to Nashville for about 8 years. And Steve Canaday, after the first year we were there, about halfway through the year, he rented a house right down the hill and about 2 blocks from us. And I went over there on his birthday. He had just gotten this house and he was real excited about it. I went over there on his birthday, and we sat around and drank some scotch and BS'd. And I was the last guy to Steve. And it was just a couple of weeks later that was another thing. I'm going, why is all this stuff happen to me? I don't know. But at any rate, let me get more to the future here. I'm about done. I want to talk to you guys. So, during that period of indifference when I was pot smoking in the mornings, I got married. And I was blessed with a daughter, and most everything else in that marriage kind of went downhill from there. But at any rate, she lives in Nashville now, and after then that marriage kind of hit the rocks, and my dad passed away, and I'd worked a couple of summers down in Branson. I also had a cover band called Odd Man Out, and we played a fair amount of time. We were together a couple of years, and Ron Grimp was the drummer, and Joe Terry on piano, and Jody Ross was on vocals, and then later a gal named Nancy Weimer, good singer, great singer from St. Louis, and Jason LeMaster, did I mention him? And Jason and I would pass the bass guitar back and forth. He'd play on one song or a couple, and I'd play a couple on the bass. And I really enjoyed that. And so eventually the marriage went on the rocks. My dad passed away, and out of his estate, which wasn't much, I quit working for a time, and I started making trips to Nashville and taking songs down there. And I had a deal lined up at Tree Publishing. And as part of those trips, I was kind of looking around for local songwriters that might be interested in getting their songs exposed down there. And I heard, I think I'm skipping another part. Oh, I was going to tell you, I told you what a crappy band member I was, but actually I played longer with the Daredevils than any other band. And a lot of people don't know that. But I was there for 4 years in the beginning, and then I went back out with them for about 3 years in the 80s. And that was way under the radar and kind of dismal. And there were just 5 of us. Steve Canada played drums, and the rest, Soup, and Dylan Cash and myself. And that lasted, I think, for 2 or 3 years. And so actually I have overall 7 years, which is the longest I've been with everybody. Not consecutively, but that's my record time with a group, which nobody would believe, but it's true. And anyway, we went on a long tour with that when it was one long tour before that, when it was just me and Soup were originals, and that was Lloyd came out on drums. Gary Smith, anybody knows Gary Smith, the guitar player, and Joe Terry. That was a long tour, end of September to right before Thanksgiving, and Soup and I were the only 2 originals on that tour, and it was even more dismal. But anyway. So I was taking songs in Nashville and looking for anybody locally that wanted to have a song pitched or whatever. And I thought it might help, my stature a little bit if I had more stuff to offer. And I heard through the grapevine that Janie Simon was working with this guy named Bill Duke, and he was a country singer, pretty good country singer from Nebraska, who was living here at the time, and a songwriter. And so I think I got Janie's number from Susie Morris, actually, and I called her and I said I was looking for stuff, and then I kind of got cold feet. I said I was going to come over, but then I called her back and I said, well, why don't you just pop in the mail to me? She said, oh, I thought you were going to come over, and I thought, well, anyway, we got together, and what a wonderful surprise. I mean, unexpected. We became close. Yeah. I mean, Janie Simon she is a wonderful person. And now it's 33 years later, and we just got close really fast. And she's seen me through a couple of more temporary insanities, and she might say more than 2, but it's been great. And it was a great honor to get to be around Simon and get to know him in a family setting a little bit, out of the business. And what a guy. I mean, he had such vast experience. Cut off.
Questions?
Oh, am I at that point? Anyway, yeah, that's good. I'm at that point. But I did want to say, do I regret going out a dozen or more times a year to squawk like a chicken? Hell no. Go Chiefs. Now, somebody, by the way, I'll tell you one thing. A lot of people seem to want to know there seems to be some question about who named the band, the Ozark Mountain Daredevils. That was Steve Cash. And for some reason, everybody has amnesia. I remember exactly the day he said, well, I think the only name we've all agreed on is the Ozark Mountain Daredevils. That's the first time I'd ever heard of it. And then he just spouted it out because that was his thing at the time. And we were at the Trilogy over off the campus over at SMS. Chuck Dunville and Susie Dunville had that original restaurant. We were going to do some acoustic stuff, and it was Steve Cash that came up with that name. So please, somebody ask me a question. Anything. What did I have for lunch?
Cash told me one time y'all rode together on the road.
Cash? Yeah, we did a lot. We wrote a lot of songs too. And
Comments about that?
well, I'll tell you, I really ought to point out that Cash was upfront and honest about, he really didn't want to travel, and he wanted to be an author, he wanted to write books, and he wanted to be a successful author, and he didn't see himself as a rock and roll guy or a band guy. And he told me one time, we were off traveling somewhere, and he goes, "This is ridiculous." You know, he said, "Can you imagine anybody paying any amount of money to hear me sing?" Well, I mean, I could see his point. So he never had the perception that this could be serious. And, he was honest about it, though. So, yeah, we roomed a lot. Yeah.
What's your favorite rock and roll story with the Ozark Mountain Daredevils?
Well, there's a couple. One time we were at Winfield, Kansas, playing I think there's a college, a small college there. And next morning we were having pancakes at this little local restaurant there in Winfield, and the pancakes really didn't taste that good. And nobody in the band finished their pancakes. And my brother, he was a redheaded guy, kind of big guy, and sometimes his fuse was imperceptible. And so he goes up, and he took care of our road managing, like I said, and he goes up and he tells the guy that he goes, we're not going to pay for the pancakes. They're just, nobody liked them. And the guy started pulling out his tickets from the morning to show my brother all the pancakes that he had sold. And my brother says, "Okay, look, I'll buy the pancakes. Here they are. You eat them." So at that point, the guy was like going to call the sheriff or something. It started to escalate really quick. And so we decided we might better, pay the tab, get out of there, because it really started to get kind of weird. So we're going down the road, and I said, "I can see this now. Rock group busted on pancake charge." We got arrested in Dallas once for jumping the turnstiles. I hate that airport. Everybody does. They were too damn big. But that's Texas. Anyway.
We have time for one more question.
What's your grandson think of your music?
The older one, the 20-year-old, he doesn't pay much attention to it. And he really should play, because his thumb reaches up to his first knuckle. And so he could play guitar or piano. And he learned a little bit of guitar, took a guitar class in high school, I think. But he's an interesting kid. Right now he's deep in philosophy. And he quotes Socrates and Plato and stuff. And he works at a gym. He went from wanting to be an astrophysicist to a bodybuilder. Now he's into philosophy. So he's just one of those guys that just bounces all around. So I think he'll be fine if he figures out what he's going to do. No, he's a character. He said one time, I know he got rabbit. We're watching TV, and Kim Jong-un comes on, the South Korea guy. He turns to Janie and he says, "Just imagine being the fattest guy in your entire country." Thank you.
That's a good way to end the show, Ray.
I appreciate it.